Thanks to everyone for turning up tonight for our Loch Lomond tasting. For anyone that's just on the call, Ant was just explaining this has raised nearly £200 for the charity, which is great. So nobody's here to speak, to listen to me tonight. So I'll just very quickly introduce our guest for tonight. We're very lucky to have him. He's a very busy man, producing an awful lot of whiskey at the moment. Of course, Michael Henry of Loch Lomond Distilleries. Michael has very kindly donated the drams for our tasting tonight, so we could donate as much as possible to the charity. So without further ado, Michael, I will hand over to you and you can run us through the flight.
Okay. I'd just like to say welcome everybody to the tasting tonight. Thanks for joining us. Well, I'll be jumping in and out of slides tonight, so hopefully if everyone can follow what I'm doing. I think your tastings are usually pretty informal, so I think we'll keep it like that tonight. So just if you have any questions, pop them in the chat or shout out. I'll answer them as best I can as we go. So I'll start sharing. So everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the order for tonight. So the first sample we'll go through is a heated single grain. Next we'll have a blind dram. So I think a few people here like blind challenges and blind tasting, so I've thrown in something just to a bit of fun there. And then we'll go on to talk about our single malts and our approach to flavour and really explain that with our 3 12-year-olds and a cask sample that I've picked just for tonight. And the last dram tonight will be the Loch Lomond 18, so that'll be number 7. Okay, so if we're happy with that, I can go on. I'll talk just talk a little bit about Loch Lomond, give a little bit of history. I know a lot of people will have tasted at least one or two of our expressions. So I'll just like to give a bit of context for our approach to distilling and flavour. So Loch Lomond Distillery, our kind of history very much tied with Little Mill Distillery. Started still in 1772. Its license to distill was granted in 1773. Little Mill Distillery was on the banks of the River Clyde. So it was about probably 7 or 8 miles away from current Loch Lomond. And when Little Mill started, they were like a traditional lowland distillery and they practiced triple distillation. And they ran like that throughout the 1700s, 1800s, and well into the 1900s. And the distillery really kind of followed the flow of the industry through that time. When it came to the 1950s, there was a huge boom in Scotch whisky. And at that time, it was blended Scotch. And that really impacted all distillers at the time, in that there's a huge demand for whisky, and distilleries had to do what they could to meet that demand. For Little Mill, that meant doing two things. The first was that they developed a new type of still, and that was our straight neck pot stills. And our straight neck pot stills have only ever been used at Little Mill and Loch Lomond. And those straight neck pot stills allowed Little Mill to keep their traditional lowland triple distilled style, even though it was from a double distillation. And by varying the cut points and how they run the still, they can produce a second heavier flavor or style of spirit. And that just gave them kind of more flexibility and more capability when it came to meeting demand for single malt for blending. So that idea of using distillation to create flavor really started with Little Mill back in the 1950s and the development of the straight neck pot still. The second thing Little Mill did, this in order to increase capacity, their site was very constrained, so there's no physical space at their existing site. So in order to increase capacity, they built a second sister distillery. So they built Loch Lomond in mid-1960s, and they put in the straight neck pot stills. So not only did they put in the same type of still, but from the very start, the philosophy and the approach to flavour was the same. So it was about using distillation to create as much flavour as we could in the distillery itself. And that's something that's just been expanded on over the last 50 years at Loch Lomond, where we use this amazing kind of distillation capability that we have, really to produce as much flavour at the start of the process, and then use Americano very much in a supporting role, really to have the focus on that really distillery character-led flavour. For the first 50 years, we really were kind of supplying malt and grain for blended whiskey. And when we changed to ownership in the 2014, we changed focus from kind of selling blended whiskey to third parties and not really using the Loch Lomond name to do that. We were very much an independent distiller selling to companies with their own private labels. So the name of Loch Lomond Distillery wasn't really used that much, and the distillery really kept a low profile. That changed in 2014 with the new owners. That's when we kind of shifted the focus of the distillery from that third-party supply really to building the name of Loch Lomond and using what we distill and bottling it ourselves. And it's since that change, just over 7 years ago, that we've kind of released all the expressions that we're tasting tonight. And we've really had, it's been mentality in the distillery, really about how we approach single malt and how we present that and connect to the people of whiskies. And hopefully you'll see that as we go tonight. I think it's a lot of talking and not a lot of drinking, so we'll move on to the first strand tonight. Okay, so the first whiskey we're tasting tonight is our Loch Lomond peated single grain. We started producing single grain from malted barley in 2007. It's when kind of this particular still was installed at the distillery. And the still itself, it's kind of a continuous column still. And although we run it on malted barley, because it's continuous still rather than batch operated, and it's a column still rather than a pot still, even though it's 100% malt that we put through it, it's called a single grain rather than a single malt. For a whiskey to be single malt, it needs to be 100% barley, batch distilled, and a pot still. So our Loch Lomond single grain made in this still is meeting one out of those three criteria. So it falls under the single grain category. The still itself, an all copper construction. So that helps give us a really clean spirit from this. If you know about even pot stills, copper contact's really important for spirit quality. Really, the more copper contact you have, the more it helps clean up spirit through the distillation process itself. The still runs about 300 litres of alcohol per hour. And to give context to this, this makes it a very small, continuous still. The likes of our based grain stills at Loch Lomond, they'll run at either 1,000 or 2,000 of alcohol per hour. So it's at least it's a third of the size of our smaller wheat-based grain still. And really our approach to it is that we almost treat it like single malt, in that the wash we supply is 100% malted barley, fermented for 4 days, which is relatively long ferment. And the only difference between, so it's the same wash that we supply to your pot stills, and the only difference is that the wash is fermented, goes one way, becomes single grain through this still, or goes to a different valve, goes to another way, and becomes single malt through our pot stills. The still itself is really flexible and gives us a lot of control over flavour. We're able to adjust the strength of the spirit as we take it off the still. If you think that normal conventional wheat-based grain is taken off the still at 94%, we take this single grain off the still at 85%. We could go higher, we could go lower, but we find that 85 gives us a great balance. By having a lower takeoff strength than conventional blending grain, we're leaving more of the flavours in the spirit itself. So we're getting like a richer spirit, both from the malted barley and from the lower takeoff strength. The second control over the flavour that we have with this is that we can take spirit off from any combination of the 8 plates at the top of the right-hand column. So like the top plate, plate number 1, is the really lightest, kind of very solventy flavour. As we go down through the plates, we increase the weight of the spirit and the boldness of the character. So the 8th plate at the bottom is really a heavy, kind of oily character. So we go through like the solventy, the fruity, floral, getting heavier in character as we go through the plates. So we're currently taking off from plates 2, 3, and 5. And that leads us to our first dram tonight. So it's our Loch Lomond peated single grain. So it's made from 100% heavily peated malted barley. Although it's made from heavily peated malt, because of the way it's distilled, it gives a very different peat character. It's matured for 4 to 5 years in a mix of first fill and refill bourbon barrels. We're probably talking about maybe 40 to 50% first fill, 50 to 60% second fill bourbon, bottled at 46%, non-chill filtered and natural colour. So if you haven't started tasting, please go ahead.
Some notes coming up in the chat there, Michael. A question from Menno as well. Good to see you on, Menno. It says, does it take a lot of modification of the column stills depending on the grain used?
No, say it's probably more to do with the mashing side, the way you handle the grains before fermentation. Once the wash is fermented, then it's pretty much straight through the column. But it tends to be columns, fermentation, and your mashing will be set up to handle a certain type of grain. So this still is installed in our malt distillery. So it uses the same wash that we use goes to our pot stills, and we have a separate, fully separate distillery for our wheat-based grain. Our wheat-based grain uses a hammer mill, and it's grain, a hammer mill, steep tank, and a cereal cooker rather than a lighter ton. And that means it's grains in mashing. That means the husks of the wheat go into the washbacks during the fermentation, and they only come out at the distillation stage. So there is a little bit of difference in that. The biggest difference is the size of the stills. We think that this column still can produce about 2 million litres of alcohol per year. Some column stills can produce 20 to 50 million litres of alcohol per year. So it is really it's a small column still. It is made of all copper. That gives us an advantage again with the flavour. Larger column stills are made from stainless steel, and they'll have a section of sacrificial copper. So there's much lower copper contact with that. But because they're taking off at 94%, they're already stripping out of a lot of the flavour there. So you don't need that copper contact. Whereas because we're taking off at lower strength, we do need that to help with the spirit quality.
So a lot of people just getting lightly smoked on this, Michael.
Yeah, and that we'll talk about peat character when we come on to the Loch Lomond 12. But really, how you distill peated barley has a big impact on the flavour. And this way of distilling peat is the most selective. So it really gives you the lightest peat influence. So this single grain, although we've put the peated whiskey first, but for me, I find this quite lightly peated. It's very soft peat. It's more like a sweet, tangy peat than a big in-your-face, heavily peated malt. And it really shows the impact of distillation, because the starting point here is 50 ppm phenol malted barley. That's the same as likes of Lafroig or Lagavulin, or those kind of what you would think of as the traditional big peat whiskies. If you can think of how those taste and then compare it to this, they're very different whiskies. And that's really the impact of distillation, and it shows how important how you distill is to the character of the spirit.
I know obviously this is a grain whiskey, Michael. Is there any sort of consistent Loch Lomond character we should be looking for as we go through the drams tonight?
Yep. We'll go into the kind of Loch Lomond distillery character as we go through. I'll really go into that on the Loch Lomond 12. But there's kind of three parts to that. It's really fruit, honey sweetness, and soft smoke. So we're really getting all three of these here. The fruit comes from fermentations and how we distill and capture those fruit flavors. The kind of honey sweetness comes from our use of American oak. And again, that soft smoke comes from that different approach to distilling peated malt. So a question from Ryan. Our wheat-based grain is roughly about 90% wheat, 10% HDP malt. So it's high diastatic power malt. That basically means it's malt that's been lightly kilned to keep as much enzyme activity there. And it's enzymes that then break down the starch in the wheat to release sugars. So it is pretty much consistent. We are able to vary it slightly depending on the malt. If the malt's particularly good, we can maybe drop down to 9%. We get enough kind of enzyme activity with that. If the malt's not great, then maybe have to go up to 11, 12%. And that's in terms of the enzyme capacity of the malt. But it is pretty much fixed around that kind of 10% high enzyme malted barley, 90% wheat. On the taste or on the nose, I'm getting that kind of light smoky character and kind of apple fruit notes. When I taste, I'm probably getting like black currant, like dark fruits, like a lemon citrus. And again, those kind of vanilla marzipan notes coming through from the wood. And I think there's a few barflies in tonight. I don't know if anybody gets foam bananas on this.
There's a few people, Michael, in the comments that have just mentioned a little bit of menthol, and I maybe get a little bit of menthol on it as well. And I know because I've tried some of the other ones that we're going to have tonight, there's a more definite hint of menthol on it.
Yeah. I think I do get some people saying like a herbal note. I do get like a minty note. I'm not sure whether that's coming from the peat or the distillation, because it can be mint kind of herbal notes. Can either be from like a step on from black currant type flavors, or it can come from the peat itself.
Yeah, it's a lovely opening dram. Really good.
Okay, so hopefully one to have a glass of water or a sip of water and hear your palates. The next dram I'm not going to say too much about, but I've just put it in here. Really, I think.
Sorry, Michael, just for anyone that kind of joined late, the second dram is the blind dram.
Yeah.
Everyone, that's why he's not, he's just not being, that's why he's not telling us about it.
Like, it's not something I get to do a lot of, is blind tasting. I tend to know within an inch of its life what I'm tasting all the time. I know like the spirit details, how old it is to the day, the cask makeups, even for like fatted spirits. I really like enjoy blind tasting because it takes all that detail away, and it takes your kind of any preconceived ideas about the whiskey away. So it's a fun way for me just to think about the flavour of what I'm nosing and tasting. So that's kind of the reason why I've put this in tonight. So it is just a bit of fun. We'll see what just throw it open to the chat, on the nose, and see what people are getting. It's 46% non-chill filtered natural color, and is commercially available product distilled at Loch Lomond. So it's not something I've cooked up in the lab to throw people off.
Don't be afraid to come off mute if you would prefer, rather than typing.
Evening all. We're getting on the nose grass, mangoes, and tropicalish. Maybe a little bit of pineapple.
Yeah, people agreeing with you there. Rhubarb and custard, boiled sweets, sweet and fruity, boiled sweets from Lee. Yeah, Ryan's getting the rhubarb and custard as well. Yeah.
It's very sweet, shoppy. 46%, did you say?
Yeah, so 46%.
No, Menno, it's not the Inchmere 12 because that's coming up on the tasting later.
Say it is it's a Loch Lomond. It's distilled at Loch Lomond, but it's not released as Loch Lomond.
Is it a blend, this one then, or is it single malt, single grain?
That'll be one of the questions at the end.
Right, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Ryan's saying bourbon-esque palate definitely has grain in it. Pete's saying maybe a single, Frank is saying it's maybe a single blend.
Go in for a taste.
Yeah, grassy and wheaty. Limes, grapefruit, sweet lemon, mocha, nice and spicy from Nick. Chase saying glass house. Nikki and Ryan getting bourbon type notes. Good evening, Luna.
Whatever this ends up being, though, it is really, really nice. Like, really, the palate, I don't know how to describe it, but like the fruit kind of flavors are getting through on it, just really, really enjoyable.
Is it really the nose transfers through to the palate, doesn't it? It's you're still getting all that sweet shop stuff on the palate. Yeah, I agree, Mick. It does come across sort of higher than a 46. So I had a few people put this out now, Michael. Can we get a clue on the bourbon? Is that correct or incorrect?
Yeah, I think I probably can say, try not to give anything away here, but say it is all bourbon matured.
So is this something you're saying it's not put out under the Loch Lomond name? Is it something we would all recognise though when you tell us the name of it? We'll all have seen it.
Not too sure.
Maybe not.
So what do you think on the finish?
Yeah, Helen and Andy, I agree with that completely. It's quite a short finish, really dry. Really dry. Like, yeah, like almost like a wine finish dryness.
A lot of flavours in it seem to remind me of like Cotswolds single malt, like standard release they do. Just not the exact same, but just similar styles of flavours coming out from it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's obviously a no age statement, but I don't think there's much old whiskey in this. Yeah, Helen and Andy get apple pie or apple crumble on the finish.
So are we ready to can maybe take a guess on age? They said it was 5, 8, or 12. What would we think?
Put your guess in the comments or shout it out. Who's going to commit first?
I'll commit. I'm going to say, just looking at the legs at 46, they're quite long, so I'm going to go older. I'm going to go 12. Just that's a pure guess on the legs, really.
We'll go middle ground on that. Was that 8, did you say, Michael, sir?
So it'll be 5, 8, or 12.
I reckon 8.
5, 8, or 12, and Tony's gone for 4. Yeah, I think it's on the younger side as well. Right, Michael, put us out of our misery. Oh, somebody, was it Nick, said Spearhead as a guest? Yes.
No, it's coming up. Then what, if you asked what price do you think it would be 20 to 30, 30 to 40, or 40 to 50?
That's difficult because I always think Loch Lomond's really well priced. Like a lot of your stuff is not. I don't mean at the cheaper end, but just really good value for money bottles. Yeah,
I've kept it below 50.
Yeah, 30 to 40. People are saying Helen and Andy would pay 40 to 50. But yeah, 30 to 40. Yeah, I probably agree with that.
And then lastly, do you think it's a blend, single grain, or a single malt? I think
This is also a much harder question when it's Loch Lomond and doing the single grains that are all malted barley. It's not as easy to get the difference between a single malt and a single grain from there.
Yeah. Helen and Andy are going with grain. Myself, Lee, and Shay have gone with blend. Blend from Nikki. Lee J's going to buy it, whatever it is. That's a big commitment, Lee J, without knowing what it is and what price it is. Mick thinks single malt. Very good. Right, Michael, come on, put us out of our misery.
So, Shay, I think the honours go to you. You want to tell everybody what it is?
I guess it's in that glasshouse blend then.
Yeah.
Right. Well.
So the glasshouse blend is it's a blend we do for the company's called Langstein Liquor Co, and they've really came from the on trade. They kind of manage a couple of bars, and they wanted kind of liquids really to use in their bars, principally for mixing. So they came to us, and we kind of, this really with an open mind. I think somebody had talked about highballs previously. This blend really came about as something that was put together to be mixed and used in highballs. So it is a blend. It is all from Loch Lomond. What is unique about it is that it's a blend made from 100% malted barley. So the grain component from it is the single grain, the Loch Lomond single grain mixed with Loch Lomond single malts. And it is a straight 5-year-old product. It is fully bourbon matured. Price, it's on their website at, I think, about £29. So I went with that for the price. So it is less than £30. So it kind of a couple of reasons I wanted to put this in. It's really, I think I'm sure a lot of people here followed the Oswas last week. I've really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great thing for Roy and Ralphie to do. It was a brilliant evening. I loved seeing the enjoyment and the passion that everyone has for Scotch whisky and world whisky in general. One thing I would like to see was a separate category for blends. I think blends is something that can be overlooked. We either start on it and move on to something else in our malt whisky journey, or we bypass it altogether. I happen to be drinking quite a lot of blend at the minute. I had a Black Bush or two yesterday. I've a couple of bottles of like Cutty Sark Prohibition, Jameson Black Barrel here. So I'm enjoying my blends at the minute. So I thought, what was it, last week, Johnny Walker released a blend made with a rye Scotch single grain. So I think blends are kind of coming up again in popularity. Well, not popularity, but profile, in that they're offering kind of just an alternative, maybe at a better value proposition than single malts. It was seen from this, it is that sub £30 mark. And I think it was kind of, blends offer that kind of a great value to quality engagement proposition for us. I am mostly a Scotch single malt drinker. And I've kind of, again, personally, I'm kind of drinking more blend. It's just on that flavour chase. I think they're a great place to go. I think from Ryan, the rye is made in Teenanich. I think that distillery has a mash filter. I know rye is really hard to I don't know if, sorry, it's, sorry, just the notes available, or sorry, so being asked about the name of the blend. Say from Master of Malt, it's available from the Whiskey Exchange and from Langston themselves.
There's a couple of links in the chat there. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody's put the Glass House. I think it's the Glass House and Whiskey Exchange were the best price I'd seen on it. So that's so I was saying about rye being hard to produce. So the grain distilleries in Scotland tend to be large, very large, and almost industrial operations. So to do any kind of trials on them is very difficult. I think we saw Grant's do a rye at Caninvie through their pot stills. I think Diageo have done a rye again through pot stills at Inich, because it's easier to try and put rye through, mash it, ferment it in pot stills, because it offers a much smaller batch size, so it's a lot more flexible to try new things out. But I think that's somewhere that we're going to see a lot more of. I think likes of Inchdarney are looking at rye and oats. Arbiki do their Highland rye. So again, that kind of using different grains is again an area that distillers are kind of getting into. And if you think about the age of this blend and of the single grain we tasted, 4 to 5 years, that's a relatively quick turnaround. If you're going to try something new, grain is giving you the opportunity to get it out to people within kind of 4 or 5 years. Whereas if you do it with single malt, you're really looking at 10 to 15 years before you can share that with people. Sorry, Jeff, yes. So that, a couple of reasons then. So really it was, I put that a blend in as a blind. It was really to kind of throw some light on blends. The likes of Roy and the VPub talks a lot about value, and I think a great proposition value wise. But then also to talk about single grain, because I think that's one area of Scotch that's really, there's a lot of innovation, a lot of distillers trying out new things with grain rather than just casks. So I think that's an area to be excited about over the next few years. So
great choice, really good.
So I'll probably go back now to, I'll jump into the slides again, and we'll go on to first single malt for tonight.
Just remind us again, Michael, we jumped into the 12s.
This is Loch Lomond 12.
Yeah.
Just jumped on. So I talked a bit in the history about really when we were built by Little Mill, how our approach to flavour was really built into the fabric of the distillery itself. And really since the 1960s, we've really focused on creating as much flavour as we can in the distillery itself, rather than relying on wood. And to do that, we've developed a range of stills, a range of running or different ways of running our stills, and we use different levels of peat in our malted barley. By changing the shape of the stills, how we run them, and the peat levels, it gives us great capability for creating flavour through distillation before we get to wood. So the first still shape we have is the traditional swan neck still. And these stills at Loch Lomond, they're the same type of swan neck stills you'll see at every other Scotch malt distillery. And we run them the same way. So we'll take the spirit off at about, so we'll go on to spirit cut at 73 down to about 68%, giving us a collection strength of about 70%. This gives us a floral spicy character. It's fuller bodied, but longer maturing. This spirit style, we don't really start to use it until about 8 years old. There's a kind of struck match sulfury note in the spirit before that. So it's really about 8 we start to use this in our no age statement single malts. We run this still, again, this distillation style will produce unpeated, medium peated and heavily peated malted barley. So we'll produce 3 types of new make from this still setup. The second still setup that we have is our straight neck pot stills. And we run these stills in 2 different ways. The first way we have of running these stills is with a wide cut on the spirit run. So we look at taking the spirit from the spirit still from 90 down to about 60, 55% strength on this. So it's a very wide spirit cut. And this gives us kind of apple and lemon flavors and a medium to full bodied spirit. You can see there, with this still, we also have the ability to flood the top of the still neck. So that gives us kind of extra cooling at the top of the still. And for this still setup, we have that cooling ring turned off. So it's basically we turn off the water to the cooling ring. So the still just operates as normal without the water running to it. We run this still as unpeated, medium peated, and heavily peated malted barley. So again, we're producing 3 types of spirit from this one still setup. So our third and final still setup, again, it's the straight neck pot still, but this time we're taking a very tight spirit cut. We're taking the spirit from 90 to about 80% strength. So this really captures the kind of fruitiest, really estery solvent spirit, a great way of concentrating all the fruit character. You'll see here that we have the cooling ring on. So we're continually running water through the top of the still. Again, that makes it harder for heavier flavors to get out of the still. So what we're seeing with the 3 still setups is the first still setup is the least selective. And as we move to the straight neck, still at low strength, and then the straight neck still to the high strength cut up collection strength, we're increasing how selective the stills are and what flavors they allow into the new mix spirit. You'll see that the straight neck still with the tight collection strength, or the tight cut points, that high collection strength, we're taking the spirit off the still 85% strength here. That is a relatively high collection strength. By doing that, we're making this very selective, and we get lots of fruit flavor, peach, pear, but we get like a medium body, whereas with the first still set we had that kind of full bodied. So again, the distillation becomes more selective. We're getting that lighter style spirit through. And we run this still setup on unpeated and heavily peated malt only. So we're producing 2 styles of spirit from the still setup. So what that means for what we have in the glass is that what we'll be tasting with our single malts is that most of the flavor that we pick up when we taste them is from the distillation rather than the wood. You'll hear people kind of throw figures about that 70% of whiskey's flavor comes from the cask. That is very much dependent on the distillery. And with Loch Lomond, we're looking at producing up to 70-80% of the flavor that we taste from the distillery and only 20-30% from the wood. So we kind of flip that on its head. And it really gives us a different kind of flavor style than other distilleries. So by using the different ways of distilling, we're able to create a greater range of flavor in the distillery itself. So we produce 8 separate spirit styles that vary in body from the light to medium to full bodied and peat level. So each of those 8 flavor styles is matured individually. And then when we come to the expressions that we're tasting tonight, each expression will be a unique combination of those styles. So they'll vary in which of the 8 spirits are combined, but also in the proportions of those spirits. So it really is about kind of mixing. If we want certain flavors, we use certain spirit styles and we combine them in a way that really gives us the flavor profile that we're tasting in the glass.
Michael, I'm pretty relatively new compared to some of the people on here to whiskey, but that to me seems very unique to Loch Lomond. Is there any other distilleries in Scotland basing it on the distillate as opposed to the cask? Yeah,
well, I think I don't know if anybody's done any tastings with Raasay.
Yeah.
If you think how Raasay use different yeasts and different peat levels, their approach is similar to us. Holyrood, I know, are using different types of malted barley, different yeasts. I don't know if they're going to release kind of 4 separate single malts, each with their own style rather than combining them. So other than Raasay, I'm not too sure if any other distilleries have this kind of overall approach. It comes from our kind of blending history, where we would have had this approach for blends. But now when we're really a single malt distillery, we're using that same approach to flavour. And it's something that we can talk about it as being innovative, but if you look at Scotch whisky and even Irish whisky, distillers we've been making whisky in Scotland and Ireland for 600-700 years. And we know a huge amount about how to shape the flavour of the spirit we make. And throughout the last kind of 200 years, that's led distillers down more on one path about how to give a consistent flavour. That's been important as single malt brands have become more important. when you're buying the likes of a Macallan, that it'll always taste the same. So for the last kind of about 100 years, it's really been about using that knowledge and understanding of distilling to produce a consistent flavour from that distillery. With Loch Lomond and Little Mill previously, it was the decision to kind of use that knowledge to shape and introduce variation in the flavour of what the new make was. That was really kind of innovative at the time. And that was over 50 years ago now. So we've really just built on that, and we're using that distilling knowledge now to really control and shape and pull out very specific flavors that we want in the new make spirit, and then kind of bring them together in a very kind of specific way to get what we're tasting in the glass.
Michael, I'm just keen, absolutely fascinating, but at the rate of 2 drams an hour, we're going to be 3.5 hours in this call.
Yeah. So that's the kind of most of the talking with. So we can kind of speed up now. So if we want to move on to the second dram,
oh, we might have lost Michael. So it's a 12-year-old we're on to now. Michael did say this might happen, but he'll dial back in if his Wi-Fi goes. So can we still do chat? What's everyone getting on the 12-year-old? And I think some of our friends who do not have these drams have the 12-year-old. So yeah, there's Luna in as well. Meaty flavour up front.
This one, Ben, is like caramel. It's all the way on the nose for me. It's a lovely. I actually, when we had them all lined up, we've kind of been letting them air, and this one stood out on the nose for us as being kind of the most Moorish out of the lot. Just really lovely and caramelly and sweet, and right up my alley.
Yeah, I get a lot with a lot of Loch Lomond. That's almost a tongue twister. I get that caramelized apple orchard fruit flavor through the whole range. That's why I was asking earlier to see if Michael would agree with me. But yeah, I get that vanilla, caramel, apples.
But you also can, as you know, as everyone, there's that obviously that Loch Lomond backbone through them all as well, which is I think you were asking him that as well about what the Loch Lomond kind of palate is or flavour notes are, and you can get it through all of them. They just vary. You know, it's just a gorgeous lineup, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to getting to the seventh one, let alone the third one.
No. I don't know if anybody else gets this, is not so much in this one, but some of the later ones we get. I get, because I used to eat them as a kid, honey nut lips. It's like a honeyed cereal, malty barley type note. Lee, we're on the 12-year-old.
I'm just wondering what happens now with regards to Michael, being as he's the host and he's not here.
Helen and Andy, you didn't get the 18-year-olds. I am so sorry about that. I will send you a dram of something.
No,
it won't be the 18 because I don't have any. I don't know where that's went then. Did somebody get 2 samples of 18? Oh, well, Frank, yeah, it might be in your parcel, Frank or Desi. It might be in your parcel.
We won't begrudge Frank that. We won't begrudge Frank that.
Definitely none left here, so it's in someone's parcel. I'll send you a dram or something else.
No, don't worry, Ben.
I'll sort it.
I don't know what happened there, but say that's having a few Wi-Fi issues, so I don't know if it was that dropped out or not.
That's okay. We're all good. We were just
Michael, I've made you host again, just in case you do have any more slides as well. All right, mate.
Yeah. Thanks. On the 12, how are we finding that?
Yeah, we're just saying a lot of very positive comments there. Vanilla, caramel, apples, orchard fruits. Yeah, lots of green apples there from Lee.
So the three kind of bottled 12-year-olds that we're tasting tonight, they're all bottled at 46% non-chill filtered. There is caramel used in them, just because they're all American oak, and bottled in clear glass. It's kind of the natural color of these is more of that. So the presentation, it's not an all, it is 46 non-chill filter, but it's not all natural. The maturation on this is all American oak. So it's probably a small amount of first fill bourbon, a small amount of recharred American oak from our cooperage, but it's mostly refill American oak. So we're probably talking about 20% first fill spread across bourbon and rechar, and about 80% refill wood.
Given that Loch Lomond's so focused on then that the spirit character, is that a kind of going trend in a lot of your range, is refill casks being quite dominant?
Yeah. It's something I'll talk probably more about it later. We'll speak about our cooperage. But
that Michael dropped out again.
Yeah, thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Then I think the green bottle is just the old presentation. I think it's this. I think it's before they rebranded. I could be wrong on that, but I think so. When he comes back, will we just go, right, dram 6? Yeah, just to freak him out a bit.
This one is so much different on the palate than the nose, isn't it?
You think so?
I do, yeah. Because I was just getting like, yeah, I suppose going back in on the nose now, not because I've tried it.
I like Loch Lomond a lot, and it was this one that got me started on it. I really like this one.
As I mentioned before as well, I think this is like, Shay, you'll know better than me, it's about 35 quid, this bottle. I think it's cracking value for 35 quid.
I think it's even below 30 euros here sometimes.
Wow.
I think with the difference, like now you're getting nose and palate, I think the flavours are very similar in the nose and palate, but you don't get the kind of heavier spirit on the nose that you do notice very much in the palate.
You're on mute, Michael.
We do use kind of American oak very much in the background. So it is part of that signature distillery character we have. But it's really the spirit character leads and the wood character very much supporting that. And it is peated. So we're really looking for a soft smoke just on the finish. So I tend to get fruits like a lot of apple, pear, and a lemon, citrus. And then I get kind of biscuity vanilla, and then the smoke coming through in the finish, and it just kind of clears the palate for the next sip.
Michael, Menno asked the question earlier, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was along the lines of, given that the distillery is so focused on the distillate that comes out, is that even more important that your product is non-chill filtered? Yeah.
And that's why we made a conscious decision that from 12 and up, we would bottle at 46%. We're putting a lot of work in to get kind of these fruit flavors there, and by how we mash, ferment, and distill, and really chill filtering takes out long chain esters. So it basically takes out fruit character that we're working hard to kind of put into the spirit. So it is, we do chill filter, but we keep that to it's what we call our multiple range. So we have like our Loch Lomond Original, Loch Lomond Classic, and Loch Lomond 10-year-old. They're really for like supermarkets and multiple outlets. And we then have from our Loch Lomond 12-year-old up our kind of whiskey specialist retail. So they're all 46% above.
Yeah, people are questioning the peat on this, not getting a lot of peat. Just a very, very slight note.
No, it's about, trying to think, it's about 5% medium peated.
Yeah, just a touch then. Yeah.
We use 4 spirit styles in this. So we use the 3 unpeated spirit styles. So we use the swan neck stills unpeated, the straight neck stills at low strength, low collection strength unpeated, and the straight neck stills at high collection strength unpeated. And then we use a small amount of straight neck stills, low collection strength, medium peated.
Well, I think all round a very positive response to that one.
Good. So I'll say this now, it's my kind of favourite Loch Lomond.
Well, that's a big call, Michael. You ask most people, it's like asking them to pick their favourite child. You go, yeah, that one.
Yeah. So before you've even met them, I'll say this one. Okay, so I'll jump back into so Anthony, if you could make me a host again. So I've gone on to my phone for internet to, I think the house Wi-Fi is kind of dropping in and out.
Okay, mate, you're back to being a host.
Okay, thanks. So we're now going on to our 4th dram of tonight, and that's the Loch Lomond Inchmurrin 12-year-old. And we call that our fruity and sweet expression. So if you want to nose and taste it while I'm talking, we can then have a chat through once I've given you a bit of background. I think Menno talked about, is a non-chill filtered presentation important to us? And this is really why it is. It's during the fermentation when we create the fruit character. We use, when we're mashing, we use a very clear or slow runoff, give us very clear worts. Again, that helps with yeast growth when it comes to fermentation, and because yeast need to grow quickly to create fruit flavour. So if you have a cloudy wort, the particles in the wort coat the yeast and can interfere with how they grow. So clear worts really allow the yeast to grow as fast as they can. So when they're growing fast, they produce fruit flavours. Second thing is the yeast. We use specific strains of yeast for shapes of stills. For our swan neck stills, we use a different type of yeast than for our straight neck stills. And that yeast, the yeast for the swan necks gives more a floral, herbal character, whereas the yeast for the straight neck stills gives more estery, fruity character. And then the third thing we do is time. We use a longer fermentation time, and that allows bacteria to grow in the wash. and produce a secondary fermentation where we again create more kind of esters and fruit character. So that's really the first part, is creating the fruit character in the wash. And then just as important is the distillation part, where we capture all that fruit that we've kind of put all this effort into creating. And we do that in our straight neck pot stills. So our straight neck pot stills have only ever been used at Little Mill Distillery and Loch Lomond. When they're at Little Mill, it was really to allow the distillery, even though they're double distilled, because of the be able to get a very light spirit by using a high cut point, they're able to give a triple distilled character. So Little Mill had been triple distilled, and by using this shape of still and running it in a certain way, even though it was double distillation, they were able to get that lowland triple distilled character. And that was really important to them at the time. But just as important was that if they changed how they ran the still, they could get a heavier style of spirit from it. And that's really what we do now. We have the kind of high strength cutoff that gives us a triple distilled style, and a low strength cut that gives us a heavier spirit style from the still. The still itself has copper plates in the still neck. So the wash still will have a single plate right at the top of the still neck, but the spirit still has 17 plates throughout the neck of the still. And that's really in the wash still. When wash can bubble up, it can coat the still, coat the plates. So we only put a plate in at the very top. But once we have that first distillation over with, and we're dealing with low wines and faints, much cleaner, so we're able to put more plates in. What the plates do is they slow the spirit down as it goes through the neck of the still, and really allows for more separation of heavy flavours and lighter flavours. And that's really the principle that these stills are based on. They try and keep heavy flavours in the body of the still and only allow the kind of fruity, floral, sweet flavours into the new neck spirit. When we change the takeoff strength, we can also have the still head cooling on or off. And again, that really impacts on the flavour and making it more selective than the swan neck still. So going on to the Loch Lomond Inchmurrin 12, it's 100% spirit from our straight neck pot stills at high collection strength, unpeated. And we'll have a quick chat about those flavours now.
Michael, there's a question from Menno, given everyone's reaction to it. Menno saying you're dropping this from the core range?
No, we've dropped Inchmurrin as a separate brand. You'll notice now that it is firmly Loch Lomond, and the Inchmurrin is like a very much in small print. And that's, we were finding that having a Loch Lomond range, having an Inchmurrin range and an Inchmone range was confusing to people. They thought there was 3 distilleries, so they weren't able to kind of join us all together. So what we've done now is take away the separate ranges. So we have one range. We've brought the Inchmurrin 12 and the Inchmone 12 into the Loch Lomond range. We have discontinued Inchmurrin Madeira and the 18-year-old as core range expressions, but they are now duty-free. A lot of comments about like the peppery finish, and again, that is down to the yeast. Some people think that this is peated, but it's fully unpeated, and it is just the pepperiness from the yeast flavors that come through. Again, Menno saying a ghost of Little Mill flavour. This is the triple distilled style that Little Mill used. So it is the kind of that link to Little Mill distillery. This is kind of that kind of triple distilled lowland style that Little Mill had for kind of nearly 200 years. We'll chat about croissants, and again, it's that kind of buttery, kind of sweet texture. And I think this is, it is because of the way it's distilled. There is lots of kind of fruit flavors, lots of vanillas, kind of butteriness there. So the almond kind of notes running into the kind of vanilla marzipan from the American oak maturation, and really just the fruit from the fermentation and how it's capture that with the high strength cut.
So this is about 40 quid as well, I think, a bottle.
Yep.
Again.
So the 3 12-year-olds we're tasting tonight are all about £40. I think, I don't know if anybody caught it, but the Loch Lomond 12 was on Master of Malt in Amazon earlier this week for about £30 on offer.
I think as well the Inchmurren and Inchmore Royal Mail whiskies had them on offer for about £33 now.
And if you can't find them on offer, I think I'm right in saying, Michael, if you buy direct from the distillery at the minute, it's free postage and packaging.
Yeah, so I think they should be about £40 from us. I haven't checked for a while. And we've used these names as they are islands on Loch Lomond. Inchmurren is the largest island on Loch Lomond. The name translates into Scots Gaelic as the grassy isle. So just with the kind of fruity floral type flavours we get with this, I thought that was appropriate for this. Luna is asking, it's a triple distilled, it's similar to a triple distilled style, but it is double distilled. Because of the way it's distilled, we're really able to get the concentrated fruit flavors of a triple distillation in a double distillation here.
Shay, I was just about to say that actually. I only found that out a couple of years ago. There's an island on Loch Lomond that has about 90 wallabies on it.
Yeah. The other thing about Inchmurren Island is that it's home to the Scottish naturalists. So if you Google Inchmurren, you get a whole lot of stuff that you don't really want to think about when you're looking for whiskies. So the islands on the loch, I don't know how many there are, but I think there's maybe 10 or 12 that have kind of decent sizes. There is one with wallabies on it. I'm not sure what the name is. A lot of the islands are under private ownership. I think Inchmurren has a hotel on it, so you can actually go and stay there. But again, for us, it was really that kind of nod to the location of the distillery and our name that we used a couple of the island names. We've kind of pulled away from using them because people new to Loch Lomond find it confusing. Even people who do know Loch Lomond, if I ask them what does Inchmurren mean or what does Inchmone mean, like what's Croft and Gia, I think people kind of struggle. They're able to say what it tastes like, but not the distillation style. So just going to pour. Now going to go on to the cask sample. So it's a 2010 Loch Lomond. It is at cask strength, so it's about 59.6. I'll talk a little bit about it as you're tasting.
Really interesting, as you said, Michael. Obviously, this one's got no color added. This is straight out of the cask. So
yeah,
big
it's this one is fully natural presentation. I took the samples from the cask just for this tasting tonight. So it is cask strength. It was in a cask a couple of days before I sent it out to you. And we talked about kind of how important fruit flavour is, and that really is kind of to do with there's three areas we look at to develop fruit character. The mashing to give the clear worts, to give the yeast kind of the best conditions to grow in. The strain of yeast, how we use different strains for our swan neck stills and our straight neck stills, and time. As you'll see here, you can see that if you look at the red line, after 48 hours, the yeast's converted all the sugar to alcohol. So you could effectively end fermentation at that time, get the same yield of spirit from that washback. But what we do is we allow the fermentation to run on. You'll see the black line starting to come up, and it doesn't really level off really to about after 72 hours to 96 hours. So really looking at 3 to 4 days for the esters to reach their maximum in the wash, and kind of esters give those kind of fruity flavors. And the apples, bananas, pears all come from esters. So by allowing the fermentation to run on, we're able to really increase the amount of fruit character we get. The next thing we look at is the strain of yeast, and probably a lot of people here maybe heard us talk about wine yeast before, and different types of yeast strain is something that we looked at probably about 15, 16 years ago. We started to work on, and it's really the job of yeast in distilling is to convert sugar to alcohol, gives the actual spirit. But just as important, it's to produce flavor active compounds, really kind of flavors that we can taste when we and smell, that we're able to detect when we're drinking the whiskey. So that's kind of the two functions of yeast in distilling. So we've started trialing wine yeast in about 2004, and we tried 8 different strains. We find that some of them, they weren't able to turn all the sugars into alcohol, and then others that were able to turn sugars into alcohol didn't have an impact on the flavour. So we found about 2 or 3 strains that grew well in the wort, and also created enough flavour that gave a point of differentiation. And once we had that, we had to use the right still setup to capture those flavors. So what we're tasting tonight is a 2010 Loch Lomond. It's from our Chardonnay wine yeast fermentations, and that means we use a mixed fermentation. So we use a small amount of distilling yeast to get the fermentation going. Then we'll add wine yeast as the dominant yeast in the fermentation. The effect of the wine yeast here is that it increases the amount of esters and thiols that are produced. So esters give those kind of apple, pear, fruit notes. Thiols give the citrusy notes. So it's really important for the mouthfeel, and see, probably when you taste this, I get almost like an effervescence, like a sherbet kind of flavor and mouthfeel. And that's really down to the thiols and that kind of sharpness of the taste. We use a 4-day fermentation for it. So it's our standard kind of long fermentation. It was distilled in our straight neck pot still, collected at low strength. And that's important that our straight neck stills are better at capturing fruit character. So we have tried the wine yeast in our swan neck stills, but there's not so much difference from our normal swan neck still yeast. But we really do notice the difference when we run it on our straight neck stills. They're just better at capturing the different flavors that the wine yeast are producing. So when we talk about trials, it's probably about 4 days for fermentation. So you can tell how quickly, or if the yeast is doing its first job in converting sugars to alcohol, in 4 days. It's then probably another 2 or 3 days by the time it's gone through the distillation. So really looking at a week from kind of mashing to spirit coming off the stills and being able to taste that, see the impact that the yeast has made. That's the quick part. Then have to kind of wait up to 10 or longer years to see how that matures out. If you follow, I think as Luna's mentioned, the 2020 Open Special Edition, we started work on wine yeast in 2004, and 2020 was the first time we released 100% wine yeast spirit expression. So this is similar to the 2020 Open. However, the 2020 Open release was made in the straight neck stills at high collection strength. What we're tasting tonight is the low collection strength. So this will have a bit more body than the 2020 Open. A few questions there from Ryan. I think wine yeast is difficult to use in whiskey because wine yeast is used to growing on sugars from grapes. It's not used to growing on sugars from malted barley. So it's difficult to get it actually growing to start with. If you can get it to grow enough, then it does produce flavor congeners that are really beneficial and really provide a big impact on the spirit quality. So this, again, this is the samples of this are at 59.6%. So you can see how adding a drop of water will maybe bring out more of that fruit flavor.
So will this, Michael, will this get released like this, or is this what's the plan for this? No.
This doesn't have a home at the minute. So I was saying once you get something that works, with spirit development, you then have to wait 10 or 12 years before you can really release it as a single malt. And last year was the first time we released a full wine yeast spirit expression. So we have been building stocks of this. So we now have continuity across our stock. So we've batches of the spirit every year for the last 10, 12 years. And it's something that we do so much wine yeast production every year. So I am looking at kind of a home for this.
I think
we do it at a younger age. So
I think looking at the comments, Michael, if we were able to do a certified original single cask offering, we'd take it.
We have released some single casks. I think the Whiskey Exchange had a single cask at the start of this year. I think it was 2010 cask 346, roughly, something like that. But it would have been the straight neck still high collection strength, similar to what the Open Special was last year. The straight neck still low collection strength hasn't been released yet as a single cask or as an expression from us.
That cask has went down extremely well in the comments.
We do use some of this in our Loch Lomond Original expression. So Loch Lomond Original is one of our multiple range. So it's kind of supermarket type release. So it is chill filtered, 40% presentation. We use about 10% of this spirit style at 5 years old in it. And it really does give that a big hit on the kind of intensity of spirit. In terms of releasing this by itself at kind of 10 to 12 years, we are thinking about where we could do even a small scale release of something based on this spirit. So if you bear with us on that, hopefully we'll get there on it.
And would you release this kind of stuff naturally, or would you still colour it?
I do have a release in my head for this, and it would be a natural colour. It would be at least 46%. If anybody tasted the Open Special Edition last year, that was a 12-year-old, 46% natural colour. So I think the wine yeast is going to suit that kind of whiskey enthusiast more than kind of, say, normal whiskey drinkers. I include myself in the enthusiasts. Those people looking for something different, more adventurous in their kind of what they drink. So hopefully it would be that natural presentation, 46 or higher, when it gets to the bottle. Sort of anything final on the wine yeast?
I was just going to jump in there. Thanks for answering my question. So when you were talking about sugar, is it just a case of malted barley is mainly maltose, but you've got wine will be like glucose, for example, and that's what differentiates yeast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's whatever sugars are in the grapes, they're different to the sugars you get from malted barley. So it's just that the wine yeast kind of needs a bit of a push to kind of grow in a malted barley wort. So it did take a kind of bit playing around with get it to grow, and then to work out how to capture the flavors, because you do get how you distill does change the impact that the wine yeast has, even though you're using the same wash.
Yeah.
The open release last year was the straight necks at high collection strength. I prefer what we're tasting tonight. That's the straight necks at low collection strength. I think we get more impact from the wine yeast with this distillation style.
Yeah. It's lovely drawn.
Thanks. And again, we can't really look at doing anything with it until we have the stocks behind it. That was the point I made at the start. Single grain offers us a much easier way of kind of trialing things and getting new products out, because it is that kind of 4 to 5 year time scale. Whereas this is, if you're looking to release this, it is going to be that kind of 10 to 12-year-old really age range that you're looking for. So it is that much kind of longer time scale. Okay, so I'll go back into my slides now. I'll move on to our kind of 6th dram, and that's the Loch Lomond Inchmone, 12 years old. So if you want to have a nose and a taste of that while I'm giving you the background to it. So this is probably, it might sound like a bit of a chemistry lesson, but I think it's important to go through a bit about kind of peat flavour before we move on to the Inchmone. And that is really, peat is something as whiskey enthusiasts that we're just starting to understand more. I think we all know that kind of Islay peat tastes different to mainland peat, which is different to Orkney peat. And we understand that 50 ppm phenol peat tastes stronger than 25 ppm phenol peat. What is important here is that when we talk about ppm, like how we measure the strength of peat character in the malted barley, we're not measuring just one thing. And when we do measure ppm, we're actually measuring 7 different flavour compounds. And I've put them up here. So you have some like phenol and cresol that give more medicinal peat character. You have guaiacol and 4-ethyl phenol that gives smoky character. And the last two, 4-methyl guaiacol, 4-ethyl guaiacol, that gives spicy character. So when we distill, it's not just the total amount of phenol there, it's how that is split out across these 7 different flavour compounds. So total amount of phenol gives you a rough idea, but it's really when you delve into that, go into the detail, that really explains why you taste that in that particular new mix spirit. So it's really about how the proportions of the individual phenols are key to peat flavour. And really how we distill is just as important as the ppm level in the malted barley and where the peat is from. As other distilleries tend to only have swan neck stills, it's less kind of important to them because they only distill the one way. But with Loch Lomond, we're in this position where we can distill peat in very different ways and really kind of show how different aspects of peat character. So if you think back to when I talked through our distillation styles, I said that as we move through the different distillation styles, they become more selective. And it's the same with peat. When we distill heavily peated malt in our Swan Neck stills, they're the least selective. So we get this big medicinal peat character. So it's number 3 on the bar chart. You can see when we measure the phenol levels, we get like a big high, scores highly across all kind of 3 types of phenols. And that really gives that big medicinal, aggressive peat hit that you would associate with Islay whiskies, like the Lefroy's type. When we move on to the straight neck stills, collected at low strength, we can see that they're starting to become more selective. They're starting to hold back some of the peat, some of the phenols. So we're getting lower levels of phenols with the straight neck stills at the low collection strength. You can see where we've cut down the medicinal phenols. We've reduced the smoky and getting some more spice there. But this kind of spirit style really gives us like a smoky character. With the big reduction in the medicinal phenols, it's really the smoke character is dominant here on this style. On the high collection strength, number 1, so that's the blue bars on the chart. You can see how we've nearly stripped out the medicinal phenols altogether. Same with the smoky phenols. And what we're getting here is really the concentration of the spicy phenols. So you can see this is the most selective distillation style that we have in single malt. You can see how it's really stopped all the smoky and medicinal phenols getting through the still and into the new mix spirit. So that gives us 3 spirit styles distilled from heavily peated malted barley. So the Swan Neck stills give us the medicinal character. The straight neck stills collected at low strength gives us a smoky character, and the straight neck stills collected at high strength gives us a spicy character. When we come to Loch Lomond Loch Lomond Inchmone 12, we're really looking to show how the impact of distillation has on peat character. And this is a combination of those 3 heavily peated styles. And we combine them in a way that lowers the aggressive phenols, keeps the smoky character, but brings out much more spice. So again, we're getting this balanced, approachable peat character, even though it's from 50 ppm malted barley. So this is the third of our 3 12-year-old expressions that we're tasting tonight. And with the 3 12s, when distillers give it a range of products, they look to differentiate those products using age statements and wood types. So normally when distillers give us different expressions, be a 12-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old. There'll be an Oloroso cask, a bourbon matured, a port cask. And that's how they kind of generate those, or that's how they get that flavor differentiation across the different expressions. What we have here is 3 expressions, same age statement, same wood profile in that kind of small amount of first fill, mostly refill matured. So those kind of two levers for changing the flavour that we get are kept the same. And that leaves us with how we distill to get those flavour to get that flavour differentiation. That's really what we do here. We have these 312s to show the impact of, or how important how we distill is to flavour.
Michael, part of, I don't know whether it's your job at Loch Lomond, but normally a master distiller, a master blender, part of the job is to manage the stock and the future, because obviously whiskey is a time-consuming thing.
Yeah.
With so many different, the ability to produce so much different distillate and then put that into, again, so many different casks, that must be quite a challenge at Loch Lomond.
Yeah, unfortunately that does come down to me. So I'm the one left with that big challenge across Loch Lomond and Glen Scotia. It's a lot easier with Glen Scotia. It's like it's a 2-page spreadsheet. When it gets to Loch Lomond, we're probably talking about 12 pages in the Excel file. So it is really one big spreadsheet. The polite way of putting it. But it is, we kind of manage the spirit styles as a whole, and we look, it is all American matured, so we don't have to worry about or there isn't that complexity about having like Oloroso wine port casks. The cast type
is that something you would consider changing in the future though, or is it complex enough?
No, it's complex enough in that we have those 3 types of American oak. We have the first fill bourbon, the rechar, and then the refills. So it's important we balance the wood character with the spirit. We always want the spirit to be the focus. So it's important to us to maintain that kind of wood character in the background. And that's what we do with the American oak, and using different fill levels at different ages. So it does take a lot of time. Because when people think of being a master blender, their head kind of goes to the nosing and sensory part. That's probably about 20% of the work. Another 80% is kind of on the stock management, kind of trying to plan out where your stocks are going and what you'll need in the next kind of 10, 15 years. And when you do look at stock management, you'll get one thing. There's one certainty, and that is you'll get it wrong. You'll never you're working off sales forecasts and kind of projected production. So it's kind of those two things never you never get those two things right. So it is about just what happens next year is your kind of most accurate. As the further out you go, the less accurate that becomes. What it is about is just maintaining enough stock that gives you flexibility so that you can cope with surges in demand or drops in demand. So it's more about maintaining, a flexible stock that you can do different things with.
Fascinating. And just to sum up quite a few comments and a couple of questions there in one thing, the flexibility you have with, again, the distillate and the different stills and stuff across Loch Lomond and Glen Scotia as well, of course, as you mentioned, it must be a bit of a dream job for you, as a distillery, to be able to have that flexibility.
Yeah, it's great to work with, but it is important. What we've found that is that you can't go out. The point I made at the start, for most of its history, Loch Lomond's been supplying whiskey to other people. We haven't put our whiskey out under our name. We've only been doing that for the last 7 years. So people's awareness of Loch Lomond isn't that high. And if we kind of go and give them everything we can do, it's really confusing. And people kind of lose track of what Loch Lomond is. And I think that's what we've struggled with over the last few years, that people don't kind of recognize what Loch Lomond is. And if you don't recognize what a distillery is, it's hard to then connect with it properly. So what we did last year, we dropped the Inchmone and Inchmurren ranges, really tried to focus the expressions that we put forward. So you'll see that tonight I've been talking about our signature distillery character, that fruit, that honey sweetness and soft smoke. And that's really what we want to show across our range. And there'll be some kind of expressions that with the Inchmurren we push out the fruit, with the Inchmone we're pushing out the smoke. There will be individual expressions that kind of go off that signature style, but it has been important to us that we do kind of, we're conscious of that having a signature style so that people can relate to what the whiskey that we're releasing. From my side, it's hugely enjoying. It's a huge amount of enjoyment and love for being able to work with spirit like this. I've been in whiskey now for over 25 years. I started in Bushmills Distillery as a student. I studied brewing and distilling when I was at university. I'm not somebody who's done a general science degree and come into distilling later on. I've started out wanting to be a distiller. So Loch Lomond kind of is that dream job where you get to work with the kind of the technical side of it. And we do get to work with yeasts, and anybody who drinks beer knows how important yeast is to beer flavour, and it's not something that other distilleries use a lot. So I've kind of landed with the right distillery that we do have that focus on yeast, and I think other distillers are starting to catch on to that. So likes of Raasay that I said, using champagne yeast is one example of that. We will be looking at other types of yeast. How successful that will be, we'll find out over the next couple of years, but there is more to come on that. We are looking at different grains. Again, we'll see, if you ask me in kind of 3 or 4 years' time how we get on with that. I'll be able to tell you, but it is an exciting place to work. We do focus on that. We do use our distilling knowledge all the time, and it is something that kind of allows us to express that creative side of us.
If there was, I don't know if you're able to say or not, but if there was one yeast type that you've not output yet that are you're most excited about, what it seems like the direction it's taking, is there anything any particular ones you'd say or can say? I
can't say because we're
no, that's fair. Just in case.
No, there's a reason for it, so that's I can't say at the moment.
Right.
I tell you what we'll do. We move on to the last dram of the night, and then we'll switch record off, and then we can move on to other sort of more general questions.
There. Okay, so the last dram of tonight is our Loch Lomond 18-year-old. And I'll just jump into the last couple of slides I have for that. There've been a few questions about wood tonight, so I think we're 2 hours in, and we're finally going to talk about casks. And that is that you've heard me talk tonight about we are focused on distillery character, but that wood plays a really important role in that it's very much a supporting role. That's why we work with American oak. It is that softer wood influence, and it allows us across all our age range to kind of really put forward the distillery character and have that wood giving that kind of sweet honey notes in the background. Been some questions about kind of first fill, and we do use more first fill on our younger expressions. So the likes of Loch Lomond Original will probably be about 50 to 60% first fill bourbon. The 12-year-olds that we tasted, they're about 20% first fill. The 18-year-old that we're going on to taste is fully refill, and so is our 21-year-old. So it's really important to us to balance the wood influence with age, and we do that by varying the amount of first fill with younger whiskies and refill with older whiskies. We're one of 4 distilleries that have their own on-site cooperage. I think the others are Grant's at Girvan, Balvenie, and Glenmorangie. What that allows us to do, the cooperage is important for the physical condition of the wood. As you'll see from the picture there, we also have our own cask rejuvenation facility. So we scrape the inside of casks and then burn them again to rejuvenate the flavour impact that they'll have. So we're able to use like first fill, second fill bourbons, first fill, second and third fill rechars. That allows us to kind of balance that wood impact across all ages of spirit that we have. The bourbon that we have, the bourbons that we use, we buy direct from distillers in the US. So buying mostly from Jim Beam and Heaven Hill. And we'll buy distillery run bourbons. That means that they really come off the emptying line at the bottling plant straight into a container and out to us. And our own coopers then inspect them for filling and make any repairs that are needed. We'll buy anywhere, typically about 5,000 to 10,000 bourbons a year. We have bought up to 40,000 would be our biggest year. We usually spend in the region of about £1 million a year on bourbon wood. As I said, I talked there about how we manage our fills. So we'll use bourbon. When we buy in a bourbon, we'll use it for 2 or 3 fills, depending on how long the fills are. So if we're using it like our non-age expressions, where we're really talking kind of 5 to 8 years old, we'll have maybe 3 fills at that kind of age. If we're using it over 10 years, then maybe only have 2 years, 2 fills before we send that barrel to be rejuvenated. And again, with the rejuvenation, we'll run for another 2 or 3 fills before we do a second rejuvenation, 2 or 3 fills, and then we'll scrap that cask. So in total, we can get up to 9 fills from a cask, and that's usually about 40 to 50 years before we scrap that cask. But by keeping tight control of the flavour impact of the wood, it's important to us that we do that so that we get that background sweetness from the American oak across all our whiskies. And that does form part of our kind of signature character that we're looking to get across the full Loch Lomond range. We can now move on to the final dram of tonight. It's our Loch Lomond 18-year-old. Again, here we're really looking at that kind of age with character. Loch Lomond 18's a combination of 4 spirit styles, so 3 unpeated styles and 1 heavily peated. It's all refill wood, so that at the higher age compared to the 12-year-old, we're keeping more of that distillery character. And what we're seeing is that there's a shift in intensity. With the likes of the Loch Lomond 12 and the Inchmurren 12, we're talking about kind of apple, pear, peach, kind of that kind of orchard fruit character, but fresh fruit. When we move on to the 18, we're seeing that shift in intensity to more tropical fruit. And that's really as we've allowed the spirit to sit in cask. As it sits in the wood, those fruit flavors are interacting with each other and intensifying in strength. So we get more of a kind of tropical fruit character here. It's spending more time with the wood, so we're getting more sweetness from the wood. And we're using a higher proportion of peated spirit here. So we're getting kind of more of that smokiness coming through. Okay. So don't know if I've missed them, but good night, Menno. Thanks for joining us. So how are we finding the 18?
I find this different. I find this different to everything else we've tasted tonight. In terms of it being, I don't know what the word is. It's just more. You can tell it's an 18-year-old. Like, and I didn't quite agree with what you were saying, but I find this less fruity than anything else we've tasted tonight. This is more, to me, leather and old furniture and malt and cereal and smoke, and everything else has been sort of, well, not everything else, but most of the other ones are more sort of lightly smoked. This is, you can get the smoke on this. This is deeper and richer than anything else we've had tonight.
Yeah. And probably that richer is the kind of where that kind of shift in intensity is in the fruit, where it's contributing to that richness.
I'd say that word's come up quite a bit tonight, Mick, and not just from you. I don't get, people have said nutty. I personally don't get nutty. That's probably just me.
This is an unusual one for me because I don't normally, higher age statements, I'm hit or miss with it if I think that they're worth it, whereas this one's very much, it for me is my favourite of the night. You know, whereas normally I have an older age statement and it's like, actually, you know what, I prefer the younger version. I genuinely quite often prefer the boldness the younger version brings. Whereas this one has some of that as well, but has that kind of more refined character from a refill wood going along with it.
Yeah, and I think it is that refill wood that's giving it that kind of more, we're retaining more of that spirit impact here at the higher age that you wouldn't necessarily get with other distillers or other like 18-year-olds. That's something like my kind of sweet spot when I'm drinking is probably 10 to 15. I do like the boldness and the spirit character that I get from younger whiskey. I think like I get excited about the individuality of the distillery. I can taste much more of that distillery character with kind of 10 to 12-year-olds. So I probably drink more at that age. I don't drink so much older expressions, and well, I think with this there is that kind of refill wood. You're still getting that kind of distillery impact with it that you can find with younger expressions from other distillers.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it comes back to what you were saying earlier on the blind dram, on the blend. That for me, as a relatively new whiskey drinker, and there's drinking a dram of something, and that can be nice and complex in your older stuff. But if you want to sit and have a drink of whiskey, probably I agree that the younger stuff, or even some of the blends, are actually the more quaffable, if I want to say that word, whiskies.
I'd say when I do drink the 18-year-old, I probably drink more of it in the summer. That's when I'm barbecuing. I think the structure on this, it goes well with kind of barbecued food. Whereas like the 12, the Loch Lomond 12, I'll drink all year round. Because that's something that I can taste again and again, and every time I'm tasting it, I'm picking up something different. Whereas the likes of the Loch Lomond peated grain, that's one that I taste and don't think about. So it is a quaffable one that you get. There's enough flavour there that just keeps you wanting it, but not too much that overwhelms your palate.
So what are people's thoughts on, I'm not going to ask people to rank them or anything tonight, but what was people's favourite out of the range they've had tonight? Don't all rush.
I'd probably go with the 18, actually, which is unusual for what I normally go for, but the 18-year-old and that 11-year-old was absolutely fantastic as well.
All 6 drams we had were great. Pleasantly surprised by that blend. That was amazing. But I think the 11-year-old tops it for the ones we had tonight. Cracking dram.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, Andy. I thought that the glass house was really good, but that 11-year-old, the wine yeast, was fantastic. That was really good. And I agree with you. I've had the open. I thought the more cut point was, that's really done it a service. It's beautiful.
As Lee says, not a bad dram, really, was it?
No, there wasn't. They were fantastic and really good. Well, look, let's wrap the formal, if that was formal, part of the evening up here. And I just want to say, Michael, normally when we do these things, we have brand ambassadors on, but it has been absolutely fascinating to have a master distiller on the chat tonight. And I think everyone's really found that incredibly interesting, and the insight into the industry, into Loch Lomond, into your role within that has been absolutely fantastic. As we've just said, 7 wonderful drams, or for Helen and Andy, 6 wonderful drams. Apologies. The main reason for tonight is for us to taste whiskey, but also to raise £200 for the charity as well, which is fantastic. So everyone, put your hands together for Mike.